In 1897, a Sears catalog sold a leather razor strop for 19 cents, and every man in America knew how to use it. Today, most men have never touched a whetstone. But here's the twist. Number 7 was so common that farm boys learned it before they could drive a team. And number 3 put an edge on steel no factory machine can match, even now. These 20 skills built this country. Then disposable blades made us forget them all. Number 20, the honing steel. Every kitchen and every butcher shop in America had a steel rod hanging by the block, and a man knew how to use it before he knew how to carve. When the Sunday roast dragged the blade instead of letting it glide, he would pull that steel from the drawer, hold it, point down against the board, and draw the knife down each side at a shallow angle, alternating strokes with a soft, ringing sound. The steel did not grind metal away. It straightened the microscopic edge that had rolled over from use, realigning it true in about 10 seconds. A butcher might steal his knife 20 times a day between customers. A good steel cost $1 in the 1940s and outlasted the man who bought it. The rhythm of it, shk, 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 was the sound of a kitchen getting ready to work. Today, most people mistake the steel for a sharpener and never learn the difference. They let their knives go dull, throw them in a drawer, and buy new ones. But a man who could steal a blade never carved with a dull knife in his life. He kept his edge honest, one quick pass at a time, and the roast never fought back. Number 19, the coffee mug trick. When a man was miles from his whetstone, out at deer camp or working the back 40, he still had a way to bring a dull pocket knife back to life. He'd flip his coffee mug upside down and run the blade along the unglazed ring of rough ceramic on the bottom. That gritty circle of bare clay worked exactly like a fine sharpening stone, abrasive enough to raise a working edge on a knife that had gone soft on rope and cardboard. He'd hold the blade at a low angle, maybe 15 degrees, and draw it toward himself in smooth strokes, first one side, then the other, until the edge bit his thumbnail again. Grandfathers taught this to grandsons around the campfire, a piece of pocket wisdom passed down without a single tool bought or borrowed. It cost nothing, and it was always there, sitting in the cupboard, hiding in plain sight. Today, people spend $40 on a gadget with a slot you drag a knife through, ruining the edge in the process. But the man who knew the coffee mug trick understood something they didn't. Sharpening was never about the equipment. It was about the angle, the pressure, and knowing what a keen edge felt like under your thumb. Number 18, the leather belt strop. The last step in sharpening anything worth sharpening was the strop, and most men used the belt off their own waist. After the stone had done its cutting work, the edge still carried a faint burr, a ragged wire of metal too fine to see, but enough to keep a blade from being truly sharp. A man would unbuckle his leather belt, loop it around a doorknob, or hold it taut in one hand, and draw the blade backward along the smooth side, spine first, again and again. The leather polished the edge to a mirror and dragged that microscopic burr away, leaving steel that would shave the hair off your forearm. Barbers stropped before every customer. Carpenters stropped their chisels between cuts. A cavalry trooper stropped his saber on his boot top. The motion was always the same, always away from the edge, and doing it backward was the mark of a man who actually knew what he was doing. Modern edges skip this step entirely, which is why a store-bought knife feels sharp for a week and never again. The strop was the difference between sharp and scary sharp, and the tool for it was already holding up your trousers. Number 17, the palm and the boot. Before anyone owned a fancy strop, a man used what nature gave him and what he was already wearing. The heel of the human palm, that toughened pad of skin below the thumb, made a passable strop for a fine edge in a pinch. A whittler would draw his knife gently across his own hand to knock the wire edge off before he started carving a toy for a child. And for something bigger, there was the boot. The rough side of a leather work boot, dusted with a little dirt for grit, could put a serviceable edge on a hunting knife. Right there in the field, no kit required. Old cowboys did it without looking, talking, the whole time. The trick was in the feel, knowing by touch alone when the burr had let go and the steel had gone true. This was knowledge that lived in the hands, not in a manual. It couldn't be bought and it couldn't be rushed. A man learned it by ruining a few edges first, then getting it right, then never forgetting. We've traded that instinct for disposable box cutters and snap-off blades, but the men who came before could sharpen a knife on their own skin. Number 16, the mill file on the hoe. Come spring, before a man ever walked out to the garden or the field, he sat on the back step with a flat mill file and put a fresh edge on every hoe, shovel, and spade he owned. People forget that a hoe is supposed to be sharp. A dull hoe bounces off weeds and beats the ground into powder. A sharp one slices through roots like they were butter, cutting the work in half. He'd clamp the tool in a vise or brace it against his knee, then push the file across the beveled edge in long, even strokes, always in one direction, listening to that steady rasp of steel on steel. A 10-inch file cost a quarter and lasted years if you kept it clean and never let it touch a stone. By June, when the corn needed weeding in the heat, the man with the sharp hoe finished at noon while his neighbor sweated until dark. This was thrift and sense wrapped into one simple habit. Nobody sharpens garden tools anymore. They buy plastic-handled junk that dulls in one season and gets thrown out. But the old-timer knew the secret. A sharp tool does the work so the man doesn't have to. Number 15, the axe and the round file. A dull axe is a dangerous axe, and every man who split wood knew it in his bones. A blunt edge glances off the log instead of biting, and a glancing axe is how a man loses a foot. So the woodsman kept his axe keen with a round or half-round file, and later a flat sharpening stone the old catalogs called an axe puck. He'd wedge the axe head between his boots or lock it in a vise, then work the file toward the edge along the curve of the bit, following the original bevel so he never changed the shape. First one cheek, then the other, keeping it even, feeling for the burr with his thumb. Then he'd finish with the stone, working in small circles to polish the cutting edge smooth. A good axe, kept sharp, could fell a tree in a fraction of the strokes a dull one needed. Lumberjacks were paid by the cord, so a sharp axe was money in the pocket. The whole ritual took 10 minutes and might have saved a man's life. Today, people buy a hatchet, use it once, and toss it in the garage to rust. But the man who filed his own axe understood that the edge was the whole tool. Number 14, setting the saw teeth. Here's a skill almost nobody alive can do anymore. Before a handsaw could be sharpened, the teeth had to be set, meaning each tooth was bent slightly outward, alternating left and right down the whole blade. That set was what let the saw cut a groove, called a kerf, wider than the blade itself so it wouldn't bind and stick in the wood. A man used a small tool called a saw set, a plier-looking device with an anvil and a plunger, and he'd work down the blade, tooth by tooth, bending each one the exact same tiny amount. Get it wrong and the saw wandered off the line or jammed halfway through a plank. Get it right and it glided through oak like the wood wanted to be cut. This was patient, precise work, done at a bench under good light with a magnifying glass and steady hands. A saw set cost about $1 in 1930 and stayed in the family for generations. When circular saws and cheap replaceable blades took over, this skill died almost overnight. Ask a hardware store clerk to set a saw today and they'll stare at you. But there was a time when every serious carpenter could do it half asleep. Number 13, filing the handsaw. Once the teeth were set, the saw still had to be sharpened, and this was the master's part of the job. A man clamped the blade in a long wooden vise so only the teeth showed above the jaws, then took a small triangular file and sharpened each tooth to a fine point, filing the little cutting faces at a precise angle down the entire length. A crosscut saw needed a different angle than a rip saw. The rip saw's teeth were filed straight across like tiny chisels to tear along the grain, while the crosscuts were angled to slice across it like rows of little knives. A man had to know which was which and file accordingly, tooth after tooth, sometimes 60 or more, without losing the rhythm or the angle. The sound was a bright, ringing zing, zing, zing that carried across the yard. A skilled sawyer could joint, set, and file a saw in 20 minutes and make it cut better than the day it left the factory. This was craftsmanship you could hear. Today's saws come with hardened teeth you cannot sharpen at all, made to be thrown away when they dull. We gained convenience and lost the ability to bring a good tool back to life. Number 12. Wetting the scythe in the field. This is where the old skills get truly beautiful. A man cutting hay or wheat with a scythe stopped every few minutes to wet the blade right there in the field without breaking stride for more than a moment. He carried a long, tapered whetstone in a water-filled holster on his belt, and when the blade started dragging through the grass, he'd stand the scythe up, brace the point against his boot, and sweep that stone up and down both sides of the long, curved edge in quick, practiced strokes. Ching, 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 the sound rolled across the fields at harvest, dozens of men wetting in loose rhythm as the sun climbed. A dull scythe made a man work twice as hard for half the hay. A sharp one whispered through a stand of timothy grass like it wasn't even there. The stone had to be kept wet, so it rode in that leather or tin holster full of water hung from his hip. Farmers wetted 100 times a day and thought nothing of it. When the tractor and the mowing machine arrived, the scythe and its stone went to the barn wall to gather dust. But for 1,000 years before that, this was simply how a man fed his family. Number 11. Peening the scythe. Wetting kept a scythe sharp during the day, but the real edge came from peening, and this was blacksmith-level knowledge that every good haymaker carried. A few times a season, a man sat down with a small anvil, either a spike he drove into a stump or a special peening anvil, and a light hammer, and he cold hammered the very edge of the scythe blade, thinner and harder. Working slowly down the length of the curved blade, he tapped, 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 stretching that soft steel out into a fine, keen edge that a stone alone could never produce. It took an hour of patient concentration and a feel for exactly how hard to strike, because one heavy blow could crack the blade and ruin a season's tool. Done right, peening created an edge so thin it could shave, backed by metal work-hardened to hold that edge through a long day's mowing. European and American farmers guarded their peening technique like a secret. It was the difference between an amateur and a man whose hay was in the barn before the rain came. Almost no one alive has held a peening hammer. This skill, older than the country itself, is now kept alive by a handful of enthusiasts and nearly forgotten by everyone else. Number 10. The plane iron and the chisel. In every woodworker's shop hung a set of sharp chisels and plane irons, and keeping them keen was a daily religion. A chisel or plane blade only cut clean if it was sharpened to a mirror on both the bevel and the flat back, because a nick or a rounded edge tore the wood instead of slicing it. A cabinet maker started by flattening the back of the blade on a coarse oilstone, then worked the bevel across progressively finer stones, holding the exact same angle every stroke, usually 25 to 30 degrees, guided by nothing but feel and years of practice. Then came the strop for that final glassy polish. A properly sharpened plane iron peeled off a wood shaving so thin you could read a newspaper through it, curling away in a whisper-quiet ribbon. That transparent shaving was a badge of honor, proof the man knew what he was doing. He'd hold it up to the light and grin. The stones lived in a wooden box, kept oiled and covered so they never dried out or cracked. Today, most people buy furniture from a box and have never seen a hand plane work. But the man who could sharpen a chisel could make two pieces of wood joined so tight you couldn't slide a hair between them. Number 9. The draw knife and the spokeshave. Before power tools, a man shaped wood with a draw knife, a wide blade with a handle on each end that he pulled toward himself to peel away long curls, and its cousin, the spokeshave, used to round the spokes of wagon wheels and the rungs of chairs. Both had to be wickedly sharp, or they'd chatter and skip and tear the grain to splinters. Sharpening them was a specialized art because the flat back had to stay dead flat while the bevel was honed to a razor. A man often clamped the draw knife upside down in a vise and brought the stone to the blade instead of the other way around, working the bevel in small circles until a burr rose, then flipping to knock it off. A sharp draw knife could strip the bark off a log and shape a fence rail in minutes. Wheelwrights and chair makers depended on these tools for their living, and a dull one meant a ruined piece and lost money. The skill lived in shops that smelled of fresh-cut oak and linseed oil. When factory furniture flooded the country, the draw knife and its keeper faded together. But there was a time when a man could turn a rough log into a smooth chair leg with nothing but a sharp blade and his own two hands. Number 8. Filing the auger bit. Boring a clean hole through a beam took a sharp auger bit, and a carpenter kept his bits keen with a tiny file made just for the job. An auger bit has a screw point that pulls it into the wood, spurs that score the hole's rim, and cutting lips that lift out the shavings. And every one of those parts had to be sharp and filed to the correct angle, or the bit would grind and burn instead of cut. Using a small 3-cornered auger bit file, a man touched up the cutting lips from underneath, careful never to file the outside diameter, and sharpened the little spurs on their inside faces. It was fussy, close work, done by feel as much as by eye, and it separated the tradesman from the weekend hacker. A properly filed bit pulled itself through oak and spat out clean, curling shavings with almost no effort on the brace. A dull one made a man sweat and left a ragged, burned hole. A set of auger bits was a real investment, sometimes a month's wages, so keeping them sharp protected a serious tool. Cordless drills and throwaway spade bits erased this knowledge in a generation, but the old carpenter treated his bits like fine instruments, and they lasted a lifetime. Number 7. The push-reel lawnmower. Before gas mowers roared through every suburb, families cut their grass with a push-reel mower, and those spinning blades had to be sharpened or they would bend the grass instead of cutting it. A reel mower works like scissors, with curved blades on a spinning reel, shearing against a fixed bar, and that shearing action only stayed clean if the edges were kept keen and perfectly aligned. Fathers taught sons a clever trick called backlapping. You would smear a gritty paste on the blades, then turn the reel backward with a crank or a hand drill, and the blades polished each other to a fine matched edge. Some men filed each blade by hand, holding the exact bevel down the length of every curved cutter. A sharp reel mower cut a lawn so evenly it looked like a golf green, with a soft snickety-snick sound and no engine noise at all, just the whir of the reel and the birds. It cost nothing to run and never needed gas or oil. Today, people haul dull rotary mowers to a shop or just buy new ones, and the reel mower is a curiosity. But the man who backlapped his own mower on a Saturday morning had the best looking yard on the block and never spent a dime on fuel. Now here's where it gets personal. Number 6, the scissors and the shears. Every household had a woman who sewed and a man who could sharpen her scissors, and dull shears were a small crisis in a home that made its own clothes. Sharpening scissors is trickier than a knife because the two blades have to meet at just the right angle, and the edge is on the inside of each blade, not the outside. A skilled man took the scissors apart at the pivot, laid each blade flat, and worked the beveled edge on a fine stone at the factory angle, being careful never to round it over, or the blades would slide past each other instead of shearing. Then he'd reassemble them, adjust the tension at the screw, and test them on a scrap of newspaper. A properly sharpened pair of shears cut through wool or leather with a single clean sissk. No chewing, no folding, no fighting. Barbers, tailors, and every farm wife depended on this. A good pair of shears was often a wedding gift meant to last 50 years, and it did because someone in the house knew how to bring the edge back. Today we buy plastic scissors in a blister pack and throw them away when they dull, but there was pride in keeping a good pair sharp, and a man who could do it was never short of favors owed. Number 5, the oilstone and the kitchen knife. At the heart of every home was a good kitchen knife, and the man of the house was often the one who kept it sharp on the family oilstone. That rectangular stone, usually a combination of a coarse side and a fine side, lived in a drawer or on a shelf, and every few weeks it came out with a little bottle of honing oil. The man laid the knife flat, lifted the spine to about a 15-degree angle, and pushed the edge across the coarse side as if slicing a thin layer off the stone. First one side, then the other, keeping his count even. The oil floated away the tiny metal filings so they did not clog the stone. Then he moved to the fine side to refine and polish, and finished on a strop or steel. A knife sharpened this way glided through a ripe tomato under its own weight. No sawing required. This was the everyday sharpening that kept a household running, the skill a boy watched his father do 100 times before he ever tried it himself. Now people buy knife blocks full of blades they will never sharpen and replace them when they dull. But the family oilstone made one good knife last 3 generations. Number 4, sharpening the ice skates. Where winters were hard and ponds froze solid, a man kept the family's ice skates sharp, because a dull skate slides sideways and a boy on dull blades goes home crying with a bruised tail. A skate blade isn't flat on the bottom. It's ground with a hollow down the center, leaving 2 fine edges that grip the ice and let a skater carve and stop. Keeping that hollow crisp and those edges keen took a special skill and a shaped stone or a file guide that matched the blade's curve. A man clamped the skate upside down and worked the stone along the length of the runner, holding it square so both edges came up equally sharp, then knocked off the burr and tested the bite with his thumbnail. Do it right and a boy could stop on a dime and spray a fan of ice. Do it wrong and he'd wobble like a newborn colt. Father sharpened skates at the kitchen table by lamplight while the kids waited by the door. Today, people drop their skates at a shop and a machine does it in 30 seconds. But the man who hollow ground his own by hand gave his children the winter, one keen edge at a time. Number 3, the Treadle grindstone. Out behind the barn or in the corner of the workshop stood the great pedal grindstone, and turning it was a rite of passage for every farm boy in America. This was a heavy wheel of natural sandstone, sometimes 3 feet across, mounted on a frame with a foot treadle and a trough of water beneath. One boy pumped the treadle to spin the stone while a man held an axe, a plow point, or a scythe against the turning wheel, water flying off in a fine spray to keep the steel cool. That water was everything, because a dry grinder heats the edge and ruins the temper of the steel, making it too soft to hold an edge ever again. The old sandstone cut fast and cool, reshaping a chipped axe or a worn plowshare that no file could touch. The whole family gathered around it in spring, sharpening a winter's worth of dull tools in an afternoon, the stone rumbling and the water trough splashing. A good grindstone was a prized possession, listed right in the will alongside the land. Modern bench grinders spin so fast and dry that they burn edges blue in seconds, ruining more tools than they fix. But the slow, wet, patient sandstone wheel put an edge on steel that machines still can't match today. Number 2, the straight razor and the strop. Every morning in America began with a man and his straight razor, and keeping that blade sharp was a daily discipline that separated a smooth shave from a bloody one. A straight razor had to be sharper than any other blade a man owned, sharp enough to slice a single hair lengthwise, and that edge was maintained on a hanging leather strop before every single shave. He'd hook the strop to the wall, pull it tight, and draw the razor along its spine first, flipping it over the spine at each end so he never rolled the edge, in a smooth, hypnotic back and forth that took maybe 30 seconds. A few times a month, the razor went to a fine, flat hone to restore the edge the strop only maintained. The sound of a razor on a strop, that soft, leathery slap, 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 was the sound of morning in a million American homes. A boy learned it by watching his father lather up and shave without a single nick. When the safety razor and then the disposable cartridge arrived, this daily craft vanished almost completely in a single generation. We traded a blade that lasted a lifetime for a plastic thing we throw in the trash after a week. Number 1, the pocket knife on the whetstone. And in first place, the most universal sharpening skill of them all, the one nearly every American man once carried in his very pocket. A pocket knife wasn't a tool a man used 40 times a day, cutting twine, whittling a peg, dressing game, trimming a hoof, opening a feed sack, and it was only as good as the edge on it. So every man knew how to sharpen his own knife on a small whetstone, a stone that lived in the workshop, the tackle box, the glove compartment, the kitchen drawer. He'd spit on the stone or wet it with a drop of oil, lay the blade at a low, steady angle, and sweep it across in smooth arcs, following the curve of the belly up to the tip, counting his strokes so both sides got equal work. Then he'd test it, slicing a hanging thread or shaving a patch of arm hair, and if it didn't bite, he went back for more. This was knowledge passed from father to son on 1,000 porches and workbenches, the first real skill a boy learned that made him feel like a man. A sharp knife was a matter of pride, and a man who carried a dull one was quietly judged for it. Today, people buy blades made to be thrown away, and most men have never put an edge on anything in their lives. But there was a time when a keen pocket knife was the measure of a man, and the whetstone was the tool that made it so. These 20 skills didn't just sharpen steel, they taught patience, pride, and the simple truth that a good tool cared for will serve you for life. Try one this week. Put a real edge on a knife, then tell me it didn't feel good. Because your grandfather knew, now you know too.